I would like to say thank you all for taking time out of your schedule to sit and be a part of my speech. Thank you. Tonight, I will be speaking about something that is very passionate to my heart, Indigenous peoples and their rights. My purpose would be to persuade you, my audience, to support civil rights for American Native Indians. Imagine if you invited me to Thanksgiving dinner and after breaking bread, I take full control of your home and land simply because I want it. What would you do? Would you fight to get it back, or would you just move on? As an advocate for humanity and a supporter of human rights for all, I am invested in the basic rights for all people. Born free, a native of America, I am particularly concerned with the plight of the Native American Indians that were here first. From my ancestral research by a family member, I discovered we are the lineage of Native American Indians. This sent me on a quest to find out more about what happened to the natives. Today, I will speak to you about our government manipulating land from the Native American Indian and robbing them of their rights to stake ownership of their ancestral land. I will begin with a brief history of the Native Americans and this land. Native Americans saturated this land from Alaska down to the Pacific coast and across the Great Plains, all the way to the eastern seaboard. The arrival of the Europeans would change the lives of Native Indians forever. As the United States grew in population, the federal government sought to displace Native Americans in an increased room of Western expansion. Congress confirmed this policy officially in 1830 with the passage of the Indian Removal Act. Application of the act displaced thousands of Native Americans from their homes. The most infamous displacement was that of the Cherokees who marched west, results in the death of over 4,000 tribal members. This government betrayal, known as the Trail of Tears, happened right here in Georgia. Perhaps this is the prelude of Georgia's eminent domain law. The right to eminent domain is the right of the state to reassess, either temporarily or permanently, its domains over any portion of the soil of the state on the account of public exigency and for the public good. Georgia eminent domain law can be found in Title 22 of Georgia's Code. Prior to the contact from Europe, indigenous culture thrived in the Americas. In fact, the Aztecs, who conquered central Mexico, then migrated into Mesoamerican from what is today considered Utah. Other indigenous groups, such as the Navajos, migrated south from their homeland to Alaska into what is today the central United States. Tribes ranging from Alaska down the Pacific coast and across the Great Plains all the way to the eastern seaboard. The Caribbeans also had a mix of thriving cultures. As European nations began to colonize the America, they entered into treaties with the natives whose land they occupied. Of course, there are a lot of legal documents that would say that the newly established U.S. government gained land from the Native American through treaties and land deals. In fact, since signing the first treaty with Delaware in 1778, the United States has entered into more than 400 treaties with tribal nations. On the surface, this seems fair and above board, but one researcher writes, often negotiators and representatives of the United States governments enter into agreements with tribal nations under false pretense, securing lands, seizing from tribes, and then going back on their word. Following the divestment and the removal of the Native Americans from their homeland, the federal government restricted tribal members to reservations, which are legally defined portions of land allocated for federal recognized tribes. removal, and settlements on reservations serve two purposes for the United States. First, it clears land for the Native Americans for Western expansion. Second, it permits the United States to carry out a program of Americanizing tribes into communities of small farmers. There was no longer regards for the culture or the rituals of the Native Americans had been practicing for thousands of years on their own land. While living in reservations, tribal members were policed by federal officers referred to as Indian agents. Tactics such as creating a dependency on food, kidnapping, and controlling Indian children in boarding schools, and punishing their use of native language begins to become commonplaces in tribal communities. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, BIA, Indian agents played large roles in the resocialization of Native Americans into Anglo-American culture in 1924 with the passage of the Indian Citizenship Act. Tribal members were awarded dual citizenships in their own enrolled tribes and with the United States. How is one awarded citizenship on a land on which they inhabit? Long before the European immigrants arrived, the impact of this era in the native culture have been devastating and reached well into modern society. It wasn't until the late 1960s, after the start of the legendary civil rights movement, that the Native American Indians, along with activists, began to demand that the United States deal with its malicious mistreatment of Native American people. Native Americans would quickly and quietly start the Red Power movement on November 4th, 1969. A collision of Native American students led by Richard Oak and the Mohawk tribe. The community members from the Bay Area began an 18-month-long occupation of Aztec Island, demanding recognition and fulfillment of the promises made during the Civil Rights Movement and the Johnson administration war on poverty. National Indigenous Day was established in 1992. It is observed the second Monday in October, which happens to be considered the same as Columbus Day. Yet indigenous people are still fighting corporations and the government who employed smeared campaign legislations and even physically violent the indigenous activists trying to protect their land and the way of life. UN, human rights, civil rights members, states, and rapid expansion of developmental projects on the indigenous land without their contents in dividing a global crisis. What makes an individual indigenous in the tie up to the land? Nothing is perhaps more central to the civil rights of indigenous people than environmental protection. We can all support this cause because it is the land that supports us all. Simple steps such as recycling, renewable energy, electric cars are the steps in the right directions. I have shared and researched and verified truth as the original inhabitants of this America. Their names alone, Native Americans, should afford them the right to live and thrive in a land that they neutralized long before others discovered it. At this time, I implore you to educate yourselves on this subject. It is as simple as checking out Reclaiming Native Truth, a project that aims to dispel myths and misconceptions about Native Americans, then describe if their rights should be restored. I challenge you to research your family's land. You may be living on a part of history. All I ask is that you see them with your heart. If after your research you still feel the natives Americans should be a part of the Constitution that states, "We, the people," then you may continue to doing nothing. Thank you.